My next guest has spent years studying the crisis of working homelessness in America. Brian Goldstone is a journalist and an anthropologist who has written for the New York Times, Guernica, Harper's, and the New Republic. His new book is called There Is No Place for Us: Working and Homelessness in America. He joins us via video ahead of his reading here in Jacksonville next week to talk about it. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be with you, Anne.
So I will say this looks like a daunting book. I've got it right here. The subject is heavy. The book itself is large, but it is just so unbelievably readable. It is so engaging. It is truly a page turner. And I've seen some reviews which have been very positive, but one comparing it to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which I think is, obviously an extraordinary piece of work as well, that people find just so riveting. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that because a big sort of aim with this book was to take issues that so often turn into abstractions, the housing crisis, the homelessness crisis, the crisis of low-wage work in America. And for even those who are deeply familiar with these subjects, the aim was to not just put a human face on it, but invite readers to travel along, with these families on their journey in their sort of desperate attempt to secure housing, and to kind of make something that for some people might already be familiar and sort of force us to see it with new eyes, and to make that, as you said, extremely readable, so that people would really be pulled into the emotional and visceral reality of what it feels like for parents and their kids and individuals when this most basic human necessity, a place to live, is always out of reach.
You spent years following these five families and their children, and their experience sadly typifies the experience of thousands of people. Um, you talk in the book about how this is an emergency that is born less of poverty than prosperity. It's something I kind of mentioned earlier when I was teasing to this segment. You say that families are not falling into homelessness; they're being pushed. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It really drives me nuts. And I have said this myself when people say, all these families, all these individuals are falling into homelessness. It makes it sound like they just kind of tripped and stumbled into this insecurity. And what I was really shocked to discover in reporting this book over a period of 5+ years was that at every turn in these family stories, there were entire systems that were actively militating against their stability. And you mentioned the argument in the book that counterintuitively, this is not a crisis that is stemming from poverty, as we, I think, tend to think about this most extreme form of deprivation, homelessness. We tend to associate it with poverty. We tend to associate homelessness, I think, with the most impoverished parts of our cities or the most impoverished parts of the country. But on the contrary, what I found is that homelessness, the threat of homelessness, is becoming especially dire, not in the poorest parts of the country, but in the richest, most rapidly developing parts of the country. It's our, booming cities, our thriving cities, where the threat of homelessness has become especially acute. And I think that is because we're seeing these trends together. We're seeing unemployment at a historic low in many cities. We're seeing corporate profits surge. The signs of growth are everywhere. And it's those very dynamics that are actually, pushing people not just out of the neighborhoods they grew up in, but increasingly out of stable housing altogether. They're wages that our workers who are powering our cities, the wages that they're earning simply are not enough to keep up with skyrocketing rents. And as areas gentrify, as they are revitalized and become redeveloped, poor and working class people become the casualties of that growth.
I want to dig into that in a bit more. But one thing that makes this book so effective, I think, is that we often hear about people who are one or two paychecks away from homelessness, and then we also have this population of the seen homelessness that we see living on the street in tents and in other makeshift shelters. And your book, first of all, really emphasizes how incredibly hard workers the people are that you are following and that you embed with on this whole journey, and that
Mhm.
they are moving from that vulnerability of 1 or 2 paychecks
Yeah.
away from homelessness into homelessness. And so it's not this separate group of people, it is this one evolution that you're following.
Yeah. Yes, I try to show in the book that, that what we see on the street, as awful as that is, and to be clear, the last 2 years have seen the highest level of homelessness on record, and that when I say homelessness on record, I'm referring to the homelessness that is counted in the annual homeless census. That is homelessness that is either visible on the street or families and individuals who are living in designated homeless shelters. And the last 2 years have shown the highest rates of that kind of homelessness on record since the homeless census started to be conducted. But I try to show that what we see on the street, the tents, are really just the tip of the iceberg. And in many ways, my book is about the rest of that immense iceberg that is under the water surface, that is invisible, that we're not seeing. And these are overwhelmingly families with children, um, with working parents who are living in their cars, who are trapped in these squalid, often extended stay hotels and motels, who are living in rooming houses, who are doubled up with friends or relatives or coworkers in overcrowded apartments. There's an entire world of homelessness that is out of sight. And but as you alluded to, I'm also trying to show that this is all just one big iceberg. We're not talking about this separate population of people, even though these are the hidden homeless, even though these are the homeless who literally don't count, they are left out of the official count. Um, I show through the course of the reporting how you can be in a hotel room today, in your car tomorrow, and in a tent a year from now. That homelessness is an entire spectrum of insecurity, and it's very fluid. And and there are just as many people who are living in tents who get up and go to work the next morning as there are families and individuals in their cars or in these motel rooms who get up and go to work.
Brian, one of the, women that you follow in this is, Celeste, and her story is, dramatic, but also in some ways very typical. Can you talk a little bit about her story? First of all, just how she became homeless.
Yeah, her story begins in a very heart-wrenching and dramatic way. She is leaving her warehouse job one afternoon, and her neighbor calls. She's just picked up the kids from school, and the neighbor calls to say that her rental home is on fire. And by the time Celeste and her kids race back to their rental home, it has been destroyed. And she is optimistic, as wrenching as traumatic as this episode was. She is optimistic that she'll be able to rent another home relatively quickly. But she realizes that just in the time she's been renting this home, the ground has shifted under her feet. That Atlanta, neighborhoods that were affordable for workers like herself have become unaffordable. The city has undergone this much celebrated renaissance, and Celeste realizes that the one consequence of that renaissance is she can't find a place to live. She can't find a place that's affordable. And so this, what she thought would be a brief housing search, turns into this protracted nightmare of a housing search. And finally, she finds an apartment that seems promising, and she goes to apply, and she's rejected because she's told that there's an eviction on her record. Come to find out that the landlord who owned this rental home that burned down was not just a mom and pop landlord, it was a private equity firm that owned tens of thousands of rentals across the state. And when Celeste refused to pay rent on a home that had burned down, and by the way, it was later revealed that an abusive ex who was arrested for arson was responsible for this fire. When Celeste refused to pay rent on this home that had burned down, this private equity landlord filed an eviction against her for non-payment. And in because Celeste, as in many states, it was not required that she even be informed that an eviction had been filed against her. She only found out months later, after the judge had handed down a default judgment in her absence. And and the reason why Celeste's story is representative and not as dramatic as this circumstance was, not sort of this bizarre anomaly, is because, like millions of other families and individuals in this country, Celeste found herself with this eviction on her record. She found herself joining the ranks of what might be called America's credit underclass. And these are people for whom a three-digit number, a credit score, has really come to determine whether they have access to something as basic as housing. And with this eviction on her record, Celeste's credit was tanked, and she did what countless other families in her shoes have done, and she went to an extended stay hotel where no credit check was required, only a lot of cash up front. And then she found herself in what another family in the book refers to as the expensive prison of this extended stay hotel.
I want to ask you more about those extended stay hotels because, as you note in the book, they're something that we're all very familiar with. We see them off of the highway or along roads. And some of them, I think we really just think of as extended stay hotels, but you have found that many of them have become a different kind of housing altogether. Can you talk about what purpose they serve in this new economy around homelessness?
Yeah, as a resident of Atlanta, and I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to this, I would drive by these hotels and motels all the time and not realize that, as I came to discover, they are functioning as extremely profitable commercial homeless shelters. These are not hotels as we tend to think of them. Uh, you know, some people might be familiar with the higher end versions of extended stay hotels, places like Residence Inn or Hometown Studios, where traveling business people or nurses might stay. But these extended stays on the budget or economy end of the spectrum are the ones that are truly proliferating across this country amid a national housing crisis. These places are serving as shelter of last resort for people who otherwise would be either on the streets or in their vehicles, or wherever else they could stay, an abandoned warehouse, a storage unit. And what is really remarkable about these hotels is not just the slum conditions that many of that we see that we and I can't tell you how many hours I spent in a variety of extended stay hotels. The conditions are truly abysmal. What is remarkable is not just those conditions, but the fact that like in Celeste's case, the extended stay hotel room she went to ended up being more than double what she was paying for the rental house that had burned down. But because people have nowhere else to go, these hotels prey on people's desperation, and they are basically able to charge whatever they want. And so these places are extremely expensive. They're extremely profitable. And what is just truly striking is that the same private equity firms and Wall Street investors who are buying up, vast swaths of America's rental housing, like the place Celeste had been living, are also cornering the market on the very places they go when people lose their housing. So Blackstone and Starwood Capital, two private equity giants, during the pandemic, they saw how extremely lucrative all of this insecurity could be. And they bought Extended Stay America, the largest chain of sort of economy extended stay hotels in America. They bought this chain for $6 billion. So homelessness really has become big business. And these hotels are kind of this entire invisible world of homelessness that many of us don't realize exists.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Brian Goldstone. He is the author of There Is No Place for Us, Working in Homelessness in America. It is a in-depth study that he did with 5 families who became homeless in the course of his reporting. If you'd like to join our conversation, give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Ann. Interesting and show. In my shop next to the convenience store, there has always been a fella who works at the convenience store who lives in his car. So, he's working and sleeping right there. Another woman lives in her car, her truck right there too. So any truck stop, you'll find the people that are in the transition. They've lost their house, but they haven't lost everything, and they've moved into their car, and they're getting to work or literally sleeping in the parking lot of their work. So that's just an entire segment of the population that I keep seeing. But they're transitioning from being in a house to being in a car to being in the woods. And it's extraordinarily sad.
Daryl, thanks so much for that. Brian, your book takes place in Atlanta, but the story is universal. Certainly the experience in Jacksonville and in Northeast Florida is no different. Daryl's calling from St. Augustine, but he's seeing it there as well. And you talk about this, people who are waking up to go to their job. One woman who's showering daily in a hose. She's trying to do it in the hours where there aren't men around to watch her, but she's doing it and then heading off early to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the term working homeless really, I mean, it was just stunning to me to know that this term could even exist in America, in the richest nation on the planet, that the term working homeless could even be a thing should be a scandal. It seems like such a contradictory phrase. And yet, that is becoming the reality for so many people in this country. Right now, there are over 12 million people nationwide who are classified as severely cost burdened. And that means that they are spending at least half of their monthly income on rent alone. And so that is 12 million people for whom the slightest setback or unanticipated expense, a family emergency, a missed paycheck, car trouble, it can really be disastrous. It can cause them to lose their home and to join the ranks of the working homeless. So, the 5 families who I follow in this book, they are not an exception to the rule. They are increasingly becoming the rule. But they, they really upend, I think, these stories upend our collective assumptions about not just homelessness and the myths we have told ourselves about homelessness, like that it's the result of people being lazy, or it's the result of these individual problems. And we see how structural and policy driven this crisis is, but it also upends our assumptions about work, that if you just work hard enough, if you just clock enough hours, you might not make it rich, but you'll at least have your most basic material needs met. And these families, like the millions of families like them across the country, they expose how, not just how fragile, but really how false that story is.
You write in the book that there isn't, I'm quoting here, there isn't a single state, metropolitan area, or county in the United States where a full-time worker earning the local minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And speaking about the work and the work ethic, really, of the people that you follow, it is unbelievable. The people who are working double and triple shifts to try to earn enough to rent an apartment or to rent one of these extended stay hotels. They're
Yeah.
working longer hours and harder jobs than I think most of us could imagine.
Absolutely. They really couldn't work anymore. Like, it wouldn't be physically possible for them to work anymore. One of the families of the Celeste, who we were speaking about a moment ago, whose house burned down, tragically, she is later diagnosed with ovarian and breast cancer as she's living at this extended stay hotel room with her children. And she is having to decide, do I go to my warehouse job or do I go to my chemo appointment? Because if I go to my chemo appointment, I don't have sick leave. I can't afford to miss a paycheck because I don't have this benefit of sick leave. And so that is what we are forcing workers to choose in this country. And I think, that brings up an important point, which is that, we often talk when we're speaking about the affordability crisis, about the growing chasm between what workers are earning in their jobs and just what it costs to have a place to live. And that's certainly true. That's true even in Jacksonville, even in Florida, where just this week the minimum wage went up to $14 an hour. That might seem really high for some people. It's certainly high compared to the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, which is still the minimum wage here in Georgia. But when you consider that the housing wage, and by housing wage, I mean it's a figure that the National Low Income Housing Coalition comes up with every year for every sort of area of the country, city, metro area, and they show how much it would require, how much a worker needs to earn per hour to afford just a modest 2-bedroom apartment. And in Jacksonville, the housing wage right now is $33.27 an hour. That is what it costs just to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment. And so yes, that gap is very important, but equally important is that the nature of work itself has changed, becoming ever more volatile, ever more precarious, where people don't know how many hours they're going to be getting from one week to the next, where their employer gives them 29 hours a week because 29 hours a week because at 30 they would be eligible for health insurance and benefits like sick leave. So it's also how precarious work has become, the gigification of work, contracted out to third parties, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers who don't have any of the benefits that would come with full-time employment and other circumstances. So that is really what we need to be talking about, not just that wages aren't keeping up with housing costs.
Yeah, and as you note, the problem in Jacksonville, we know that there's 30,000 or more families that are in need of safe and affordable housing, in addition to our homelessness problem. But
Yes.
there is obviously a housing problem, and I want to talk more about that. We're going to need to take a short break, but I want to talk more about the role of prosperity in creating this problem, and in terms of escalating rents, and then also just people who are able to profit off of this system. If you're just joining us, I am talking to Brian Goldstone. He is the author of There Is No Place for Us, ahead of his reading here in Jacksonville Beach, in fact, at the Palms Presbyterian Church. That's next Thursday. And we're talking about housing affordability and homelessness. And in fact, Brian, I want to start with a call from Samantha on the South Side. Good morning, Samantha. Go ahead.
Hi, Anne. Hi, Brian.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for taking the call. I just finished reading Brian's book, and I was so thrilled to turn the radio on and hear his voice this morning. This is such an important topic. I just wanted to say, a couple years ago, back during COVID, my rent went from $1,200 a month to almost $2,000 a month year over year, and I could not believe that was legal. I could not believe that, everybody wasn't up in arms in that, and it hasn't gotten any better in the years since then. And this has been a huge passion project of mine locally since then. And I just want to thank Brian so much for writing this book. It's so incredibly important.
Oh, thank you, Samantha. Thank you so much.
Samantha, thanks for the call. I mean, to her point, you've reported that the rate by which rent has increased income is 325%, which is just staggering. There is a safety net that is in place federally called Section 8 housing, and you talk about that in your book. Why is that not working?
Well, one reason it's not working is because it isn't funded anywhere close to the scale of the need. So over the last several years, only 1 in 4 households who check all of the boxes to qualify for this really vital form of housing assistance, a housing voucher, which helps subsidize your monthly rent. Only 1 in 4 households who check all those boxes, who work, who have all the other requirements, are actually able to receive it. And the fact that we actually conduct what are called, voucher lotteries in cities across the country to decide who will get access to this assistance tells us everything we need to know. The fact that the word lottery is used in relation to this fundamental human necessity, just a home, shows us just like how I think perverse our relationship to housing as a nation has become.
One of the people you speak to in the book calls it the housing Hunger Games, which I think is
Mm.
a dramatic way of portraying it. And one of the people that you profile in the book wins one of these lotteries, wins a voucher, and it is something that she believes is going to be transformative, and it
Yeah.
doesn't turn out that way.
Yeah, that you're referring to Brit, and Brit's story really illustrates powerfully, I think, exactly that point we were speaking about a moment ago about how this is a crisis of prosperity, not poverty. Because Brit, you know, uh, she her roots in Atlanta go back 5 generations. She loves her city. She loves the new Atlanta, how all the new amenities. She loves all the new development. She loves the Atlanta Beltline, which circles the city and has really just transformed the urban center, um, uh, with new boutique hotels and yoga studios and cafes and all the other sort of markers of gentrification. She actually loves all of that. But she realizes that getting a housing voucher is going to be the only way that she's able to afford to stay in the city of her birth with her children, to have a home. And she ends up getting a voucher and then losing it because it expires when no landlord will accept it. And in gentrifying cities like Atlanta, and here Atlanta really is more representative of what we're seeing in cities across the country, where you have all of this growth. And what we're seeing along with that are landlords who are saying, I'm not going to take this voucher because then I have to cap rents at a certain level. I want to be able to jack rents up as much as I want from one year to the next, as Samantha was just describing. And when Britt can't find a single landlord who will accept her voucher, she loses it. And the year she loses her voucher, she is one of, I believe, 1,100 other households in Atlanta out of 1,600 who received a voucher, who loses the voucher because she can't find a landlord to accept it. And that is directly related to all of the development and all of the growth that Atlanta has seen. The title of the book actually comes from Britt. She returns to a place near where she grew up, where she had been living with her kids at one point, and she looks around at all the new development and the artist rendering of this new apartment complex of luxury units, and she says, wow, this place will be really nice when it's done, but for me and my kids, there's no place for us here. And that title, There Is No Place for Us, it's just as much a Chicago title, a Nashville title, a Jacksonville title, I'm sure, as it is an Atlanta title.
Yeah. And what makes that story about the losing the voucher so tragic is, as you report, there are families who are waiting years, if not decades, to get that voucher, and then to have it and to lose it is, it's just like so many of the stories in this book, just gut wrenching. And I know that when you're in Jacksonville, you'll probably be hearing questions because, like the Beltline, this city is also creating a multi use, vast network trail that is already creating some impacts of gentrification through historic neighborhoods, particularly historic Black neighborhoods in Jacksonville. Um,
Mhm.
I do want to say your reading is in Jacksonville Beach. It's Thursday, October 9th. It's free, but you are required to register for the event. So you can go to the Palms Presbyterian Church site for that. Anything in particular that you're going to be tackling when you're here, Brian?
I think just really looking at how the trends that I'm describing in the book and the stories that I'm telling through these families' experiences, how it relates to the reality that folks are seeing on the ground in Jacksonville and other communities in Florida, and also how we can address this, how we can solve this problem at the scale of the catastrophe that it's become.
Well, Brian Goldstone, it's a pleasure to talk to you. He's the author of There Is No Place for Us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, we'll be back.